In this video, you'll learn everything you need to know about AppsFlyer, including use cases, implementation tips, the best reports, and much more. I have worked with over 80 organizations in the last 10 years, and AppsFlyer is my go-to mobile attribution tool. So let's dive in and see exactly what that means. So I have this chart here that AppsFlyer provides in their documentation. I think it does a great job of explaining why AppsFlyer even exists. So you may have, let's say, an ad from Facebook or Google. A user may view that ad, or they may click on the ad, and then they're taken into the App Store itself, the Google Play or iOS App Store. They download the app. This step right here, this app download, is effectively a black box. Because they have to go through the App Store, the connection between the ad and your app itself is typically limited. App stores may have some data around installs and downloads, but historically has been quite sparse. It's really not a lot. And that's why tools like AppsFlyer or Kochava or Branch have been created. Once the user downloads the app, then they appear again in your sort of universe with the app installed, the very first launch. And this is when AppsFlyer gets to work. It takes a lot of the information that was given to that the user has, such as device ID, click IDs, anything that was passed on. And then from there, it's able to attribute where an install came from and be able to say, hey, this install came from Facebook, or this install came from Google. Or perhaps it might say this install is organic. Is a user who just found your app on the App Store or somewhere else, and it has no specific attribution source. After the install, you can have events. So you can pass any kind of events into AppsFlyer, such as the creation of an account, a login, watching the video. And of course, there's some reinstall that may happen in the future, a user coming back into the app. And there's actual uninstalls, which again, app stores today have uninstall data, but AppsFlyer can also provide it. So this is the AppsFlyer model, and they're really focused on this app install step. This is really what sort of the magic of AppsFlyer happens and why they even exist, to deal with the black boxes, app stores themselves, and try to give you a sense as to where installs are coming from. Here on this document, we'll see that there's actually lots of different things that go into play for the attribution model, lots of different IDs. Some are for Google Android, some are for iOS devices, some are before the iOS 14.5 update where Apple introduce more strict privacy requirements, and a bunch of other things. So you don't necessarily have to dive into all this, but they're there in case you actually want to look at it. Just know that this world of mobile attribution has a lot of caveats. It works in some manners, it works not in others. There's documentation that might be needed. As long as you get AppsFlyer set up properly, it's typically not a huge issue, and that's what we're going to look at today in this video. Let's log into the AppsFlyer dashboard. Here is the actual home page, the first thing you see. You can see there's actually 4 sections in the dashboard itself. There's Analyze, Optimize, Engage, Collaborate, and Export. Again, Analyze is historically the bread and butter of AppsFlyer. That is, analyze where installs are coming from. And we can kind of see the default metrics we see kind of fall along for that, right? Total installs, non-organic installs. This is typically the main distinction AppsFlyer makes at the very top level. Is an install organic or is it non-organic? Non-organic may not mean paid. It just means it's not organic. There's a specific way of attributing that install to something. You may, for example, do special links on your newsletter, and then when users download the app from your newsletter, this will be categorized as non-organic, even though it's not paid. Then, of course, we can bring in revenue data. We could have cost data from ad platforms themselves. And this, of course, retargeted. Down here, if we actually scroll down here, we can kind of see this breakdown by source. And you can see these are some are custom sources like a website or a push notification, blog post. And you can, of course, have sources here like Facebook ads, Google ads, and lots of other ad networks. So AppsFlyer out of the gate is trying to break all this down and tell you of your 200 installs, 50 came from Facebook, 30 came from Google ads, 40 came from your website, and so forth. Now, there's a lot of tagging things you have to do to get to this point, but this is what AppsFlyer is trying to give you at an overview level. We have events, as we saw before, so we can send all kinds of events. It can actually be quite helpful because then you can do your attribution down funnel. So you're not just looking at how many installs did Facebook ads drive, but how many accounts created, how many new subscribers, how many rides, whatever your core value proposition of your product is. That's really the main value of bringing events. One thing to note is AppsFlyer is really not a competitor to something like a Mixpanel or Amplitude, in case you're looking at that or you have that in your stack. Typically, the Mixpanel, Amplitude, sort of product analytics tools have very robust report building capabilities. The reports you can build in AppsFlyer are sometimes similar, but really not as in-depth and quite limited. When it comes to the attribution data, it's great for that because the reports are going to be relatively basic, just breakdown of sources against installs. So if you're going to bring events, typically I like to bring in only a handful of events, like the most important ones. So we might bring in 3, 5 events downstream so we can see the attribution performance against those events, but we're not thinking about building some kind of product analytics report in here. Now, speaking of reports, you can see here the activity report. You can see things like daily active users, monthly active users, there's some revenue, there's some session data. Again, pretty basic overview stuff. This may not even be that helpful to you if you have some other way of getting these numbers, but just know that the data is here. And I guess, you can break down the daily active users by organic versus non-organic and things like that. There's some other sort of conversions you can see. But again, I think that the core of what we want in the analyze is just understanding where users are coming from. Are they driving installs? Are they driving core events like accounts created, new subscription, onboarding finish, whatever that is? We may look at some basic retention, which there's a report here. You can build cohort analysis tables, but it's okay. And also keep in mind that generally you can also export data out of AppsFlyer. So you can actually export data from AppsFlyer to Amplitude, to Mixpanel, to a data warehouse, and do your analysis there if you want something a little bit more elaborate. So we really just want AppsFlyer to help us do the attribution. We know that attribution model behind the scenes can be quite complex and varies a lot from Google to iOS, depending on what device version they have and so on. So we want all that sort of black box magic for us to happen. And from there, where we take the data, where we do a deeper analysis, it's quite flexible. Now, we're going to look at the SDK integration in a second, but we also got to look at partners. So you of course have to integrate the AppsFlyer SDK, of course, but you also have to bring in the partners that may be bringing data or may need data from AppsFlyer. We actually just talked about Mixpanel just before, so it may be a partner that may receive data like Mixpanel, but also your ad networks, which again is typically a major use case for AppsFlyer, will be here. So you will integrate Google Ads, Meta Ads, TikTok, and there's maybe a couple hundred other networks going from very mainstream, well-known to much more obscure, sort of industry-specific ad networks. So you bring them in because there's integrations that happen between the ad networks and AppsFlyer. Let me show you for Google. So if you have something like Google, we have sort of this two-way relationship that's going on with Google Ads and many of the major ad networks. We are, one, integrating the network, so that we might have this sort of ability to send data from AppsFlyer to Google Ads, and then Google Ads might send data back into AppsFlyer. And there's a few things that may happen here, right? This is the link ID. This is Google Ads specific. It just simply allows a connection that allows Google Ads to pull data out of AppsFlyer. Specifically, at the very least, you're going to pull the install. So AppsFlyer will create this event called install, and then Google Ads can pull that event into its own network. And then from there, you can optimize campaigns based on that event. We may have, of course, attribution windows here, whether install or view through. Ideally, we want this to match to Google, so there's some parity. And then there's a specific option around reinstalls, re-engagement. Here are some of the postbacks that we're talking about, right? So that link ID before kind of links down here. And in this case, we're actually sending 3 custom events to Google Ads: write completed, write requested, and signed up. And we send either all the data or just specific kind of data. We can have a custom attribution link that we're going to add in the Google Ads campaigns themselves. So if you think about, you have your mobile ad campaigns and you need a specific link, either to an app store or something, we can actually use AppsFlyer links, and we're going to look at deep links in a second as well, the one link functionality. But this is a specific sort of ad template that will replace specific values with Google values. So Google will replace the campaign ID and the ad group ID and all kind of stuff dynamically for us, bring in cost data from Google and show that inside AppsFlyer, which can be really helpful because you can do some cost analysis on that. Maybe some ad revenue scan, which is a specific iOS specific ad network that Apple released after 14.5. It's a little bit complex, but if you Google it, it's just a way for Apple to attribute installs without breaking privacy. But anyway, this is what we do with every major integration. And we want every ad platform they're using to be integrated here and be set up properly. So all the permissions, all the authentication, whatever links need to be done between them, they vary from Google to Facebook. Some are easier than others, but we want all those to have a complete connection with AppsFlyer and anything that could be driving installs to help with attribution. Now, I have to mention something here. Again, one of the many caveats is that AppsFlyer actually makes distinctions between networks who are self-reporting and who are not self-reporting. So let me show you a list. So networks that are self-reporting include Google Ads, Facebook Ads, Apple Search Ads, and so forth. Basically, a lot of the major networks. This is the reason why I bring it up. What this means is typically the relationship here is that AppsFlyer will send data to these networks, such as the install data. So it will send install events into Facebook, into Google, and that's kind of what the link ID that we saw before with Google specifically looks like. Then Google, Facebook, Apple Search Ads, and so on, they take all the data, they combine it with their own algorithm, and then they attribute installs. And they say, you know what, these 100 installs belong to us and belong to the specific campaigns. And then they report that data back into AppsFlyer, effectively telling AppsFlyer, hey, this 100 installs belong to us. Networks that do not self-report actually will send data into AppsFlyer, and then AppsFlyer will use its own attribution model to determine these 50 installs belong to this network. So there's some back and forth here that happens between these networks. Generally, again, from your perspective, you integrate the networks, you make sure everything works properly, and then you go. One thing to note is you may have discrepancies. So AppsFlyer may be showing, 100 installs for Facebook, but Facebook is showing 120. There's a lot of sort of FYIs that go into these discrepancies. Generally speaking, you want to figure out what is the best source. What we tend to do is we tend to rely heavily on the ad network itself, if it's a self-reporting network like Facebook or Google, and then use AppsFlyer for anything that's not self-reporting and just double checking numbers. But just know that you're going to be surrounded by discrepancies. No matter what you do, there's going to be discrepancies in your data. So you just want to have an answer for why there is discrepancies, not so much solve the discrepancies, because some discrepancies may not simply be solved because you're dealing with completely different attribution models. Okay, let's jump into the engage section here quickly. We have audiences, which allows you to create audiences using your AppsFlyer data and then send those audiences elsewhere. Again, this functionality typically exists in other products, so you may have something that does this already. But we'll look at the one link in particular. This is the deep linking functionality. This is another core element of AppsFlyer, and even if you actually don't pay for AppsFlyer, in the free plan, you get deep linking. Deep linking is helpful because you can have a single link that can take users to different places. That is, you can have a single link, and it can have logic that simply says, hey, if the user has already installed the app, then go to a specific screen in the app. If they haven't installed the app, then take them to the right app store, whether that is the iOS App Store or Google Play App Store, which it will determine based on the device of the user. If the user is clicking the link on a website, it can be taken to a landing page instead. So you can have all kinds of logic in your one links, which is just the name AppsFlyer gives it to a deep link. And of course, you can do a deep link itself, which just means take to a specific screen inside the app. So this may be a very deep screen inside the app that's not simply just opening the app and seeing the default screen after a user opens it. So one links are very helpful. Again, there's specific setup that has to go through it, iOS specific and Google Play specific to make this links work. But once you have them, they're very helpful for marketing teams because you can have a single link that can be shared everywhere, and you know that it will sort of fall through the logic correctly depending on what the user is. Effectively, when a user clicks on the link, they're taken to a website that's controlled by AppsFlyer, and that website does a bunch of checks, what device they're on, do they have the app, do they not have the app, and then takes them somewhere else. This all happens very quickly, so the user doesn't see anything really. It might just be a delay of about a second, but it's generally quite worth it. You can imagine that without it, you then have to figure out, are these going to be iOS links or Android links or website links or something like that. It can be very complex. The one links also are helpful because you can add attribution data into them. So if you have, we saw, for example, like website sources or blog posts, you can actually create like a one link for all blog posts, have a specific source name like blog post or something. And any user that clicks on the link will then be attributed to that specific source that was in that link. So this is how you can start to create your own sources that are not paid ad networks like Facebook ads and Google ads, and tag them and put those links in the right places so the data flows into AppsFlyer and users are then attributed correctly. Because a user who clicks on a blog post, some kind of link on a blog post, goes to the App Store and then downloads the app, will likely be attributed as organic because there's nothing specific in that thing. The thing that tells AppsFlyer that this user might not be organic, or you may not want to categorize as organic, is some kind of special one link. If we actually open here, let's see if we can look at the quick settings here. So again, we have a custom media source. We can kind of make our own media source if we wanted to. Here is the link itself. You can have your own domain, of course, so the branding matches your website. Down here, you have any kind of deep link interaction. And here's sort of the logic I was talking about, right? If the app is installed, isn't installed, take them to the App Store or that. If it is installed, then take them somewhere else. If it's on the website, then take them here. You can have additional parameters, special look-back windows, maybe a cost per install if you want to manually set it, and so forth. So there's a lot of things you can do with the links. And generally, they're quite helpful as a way to bring some order into what can be a very chaotic way of trying to get users into the app itself. And for the user, it's quite seamless. They just click a link. The link may actually look like your brand. It may be your actual brand domain, or sometimes companies have special domains that are a little shorter than their actual domain. They click it and they end up in the right place from the perspective of the user. A couple of things that we're not going to cover fully, but just so you know, Optimize effectively allows you to bring all your creatives from different places and see the performance in one place. It can be helpful. I haven't personally worked with this feature myself. Typically, the creative optimization I have seen happens at the platform level, since those tools tend to be specifically designed for them. So, Facebook has their own tools for analyzing creatives, and same Google Ads and so forth. But this could be intriguing nonetheless. Typically more of an enterprise feature nonetheless. We saw collaborate with the partners, engage with the one links, and generally these are all sort of one links related things. So, like a web to app is really a question about one link. Then we have build links. You can create links dynamically. The domains themselves used for links and so forth. Analyze, of course, we saw. So the only thing left that we want to look at is actually the SDK integration. So we'll start with the documentation. Now, I've done about maybe 15, 20 AppsFlyer integrations over several years. And generally, there's always something missing. And I think the reason why the integration is never perfect from the get-go compared to other tools like Mixpanel, Amplitude, Segment.com, which you can do pretty well from the get-go, is there's so many little things that have to be done to get AppsFlyer set up. It's really a lot. This guide kind of gives you an overview of everything, but it's actually just an overview of other documentation links you have to look at. So I want to give you a walkthrough of this, but it's impossible to cover everything. There's just a lot. So we have to, of course, start the SDK. There's specific instructions, whether that is for Android or iOS. So we look at that. Then when we get into the specific links, we have to do a few things. We may pass our own user ID. For example, AppsFlyer will create their own ID, but we may want to pass our own user ID, which is generally pretty helpful. So we want to integrate that. So there's an article here. There's specific links if your apps are installed on Google Play. There's something called the Google Play install refer. You want to capture that from the Google Play SDK and then send it to AppsFlyer. So there's links for that. Then for iOS, you have to set up the consent screens you'll have likely seen. The whole ask app not to track me or to track me. So you have to set that up, the ATT. There's instructions for that. This is the consent dialog that we're talking about, the ATT. There's also the scan network, which is special for iOS, which also has to be set up with anything after 14.5. Then you can send events. We saw those, like write requested, write completed. So you can send custom events. And of course, events themselves can have revenue. You can pass in-app purchases or anything like that. There's specific setup for one link. So you have to set up the one link integration so your app is able to read them. Some deep linking setup. Typically, this also varies dependent on, let's see if I see here, Google Play and Android. Typically, iOS and Google Play actually calls it differently. I think one calls them universal links and the other one calls them deferred links. So again, just double check that integration. And some of the integration will actually take you to specific documentation in iOS and in Google Play. So keep that in mind. And that's about it. Now, there's a lot of things here. So your developer will likely have some back and forth here to get all of this set up. The good thing about the SDK integration is they actually have very robust tools for testing this. So let me show you that. So down here under settings and then the SDK integration test, you get something like this. So this is actually quite helpful because you can actually test at least 3 major use cases in your app itself. So you can do a non-organic install, which again is like anything that's paid ads or anything that you have tagged directly with the one link. You can do the in-app events. And you can do it kind of retargeting. If you open this one, the way the test works is actually pretty simple. You set up a test device first, and test devices are set up here. Typically, you have to download a specific AppsFlyer app on your device. There's some information there. You set it up as a test device. Again, not very complex. Once you have the test device, you determine if it's App Store or Google Play. There's a QR code, and the QR code kind of takes you through the installation process of the app, sends data back to AppsFlyer, and then AppsFlyer tells you if things are set up properly. It's actually quite nice. It's a very nice, robust way of testing it. You're still going to have to do special tests on the one link testing, you're going to do special tests on the deep links to make sure that, if you're deep linking to a specific screen inside your app, you have to test that. Of course, all the revenue data is coming in. There is testing generally that has to be done with the partner networks themselves. So when you integrate Google or Facebook or Apple Search Ads, make sure the data is coming in as expected and make sure that platforms are receiving data as expected. I sometimes recommend companies run a very small test, actually. If they're going to do something on Facebook ads, instead of doing some major, $50K, $100K a month campaign, maybe do something smaller, maybe just a few $1,000s, maybe even less actually, just to see the data and make sure everything's flowing properly. Because again, lots of caveats, lots of things that can go wrong. It's just helpful to do that. Of course, you're going to run your SDK integration tests, and then making sure that data is flowing to wherever it needs to go. So if you try to send it to Mixpanel or Amplitude or something like that. The other limitation you got to keep in mind too is that typically if you're doing it on a production app, you have to take the app through an approval process, which may take a few days or more, depending on what's there. You want to make sure you don't violate any kind of specific terms of service with Google Play or iOS, specifically around privacy. So that's why you want to double check things. Otherwise your app gets rejected and you have to go back to a drawing board and things like that. So again, it's not an impossible task, but just manage your expectations to know that this is generally a tricky integration that has a lot of different steps. If you're going for a lot of the different features, if you don't care about some things like the one links and things like that, then you can skip them. But even then, there's just lots of things that have to go for both Google Play and iOS. Your framework itself might affect it, if you're using something like a React Native versus not. But it can be done. You can do it. It's possible. You have the integration test. You can, and it's something you want to become familiar with. So let me finish up with pricing. The AppsFlyer pricing is actually quite straightforward. They have a free plan, but the free plan does not include any of the attribution that we have been talking about. It's really just about deep linking. You can see here, deep linking, more deep linking. Here's the links I was telling you before. iOS calls them universal links. Android calls them app links. There's more links, referrals, which typically has to do with like links and things like that, and some other things around like social media and marketing. So this is just more about deep linking and some basic tracking around where users are coming from, but really not mobile attribution, and really not the kind of attribution you might be thinking about if you're going to be using Facebook ads and Google ads and Apple search ads and so on. Instead, we have to go into the growth plan, and the pricing is simple. It's 7 cents per paid conversion for any non-organic conversion. So if you bring 1,000 installs that are non-organic, that AppsFlyer categorize them as non-organic, then it's 7 cents for those 1,000 conversions. Once you get that, you do get a lot of stuff we talked about: mobile attribution, multi-touch, the scan network from iOS, and specific sort of iOS specific IDs. Some web to app attribution with the one link, some of the reports we saw, like cohort, retention, dashboards, data export, and so forth. So generally, this is where a lot of companies start if you don't have a complex setup. And anything that's not complex is simply anything that doesn't have TVs or game consoles and things like that, which is the third plan. So if you're looking at this plan and you're wondering what this is, enterprise typically has enterprise features like dedicated support and training and so on. Fair enough. But at the very top, you have cross-platform attribution, CTV, OTV, that kind of stuff. This is typically for companies that are doing TV advertising, maybe advertising on platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, has ads these days. Game consoles like PlayStation or Xbox. CTV actually means connected TV hub, and OTT means over-the-top devices. So generally, this is all about TV. It's generally pretty complex attribution to drive users into the specific platforms and devices. But if you're just using, you have a regular app on iOS and Android, and you're running ads from Facebook to those apps, or Google to those ads, TikTok, any of the mainstream sort of digital advertising channels, you're probably fine. If you have something more advanced, then you're really in the enterprise plan. And some things here, some audience segmentation, which we didn't see, some A/B testing, other kind of testing, more raw data and things like that. But again, unless you're there and you have this complex setup, you don't need that. You're likely in the middle plan at 7 cents per conversion, and you can just quickly map that out to see what that looks like for your organization. So we cover a lot in this video. We saw the attribution model from AppsFlyer, at least at a basic level. It's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. So maybe one day in the future video I might cover all of it, but it's a lot of different identifiers and different models. From your perspective, you can sort of trust the black box as long as you have set up things properly. We set some of the data, the dashboards, the activity reports. We know this cohort retention. Generally, the analysis is pretty simple in AppsFlyer, but you can export the data to something a little bit more flexible, like a mix panel, like an amplitude, like a data warehouse. We saw deep links and the value of deep links and how powerful they can be. We, of course, saw, at least briefly, some of the features like creative optimization, some of those audience building that may be relevant. We talked a little bit about the SDK. There's a lot in the SDK. There's a lot of things that need to be set up. They vary from Google to iOS. So you just have to really become familiar with the documentation. There's the integration test that makes things a little easier, but nonetheless, there's likely going to be a lot of back and forth to get something like AppsFlyer set up to do the attribution properly. And of course, we finish with pricing. That is all I have for this video. My name is Ruben Ugarte. A few links in the description that you may find helpful. If you want help sorting through the craziness that can be the AppsFlyer integration, get in touch. There's a few links on my website, rubenugarte.com, that can show you how I help organizations sort through this integration and get it done properly the first time and make sure that data is something you can trust. So if that's a good fit for you, check that out. You can get in touch. Number two, my book, The Data Mirage, helps you understand why companies fail to actually use data. So that can also be a helpful resource. It covers a little bit of AppsFlyer, but just is a more broad level strategy on how companies can use data. Number three, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Put your questions in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer them as much as possible. With that being said, that is all I have. Until next time, we'll talk soon.